Hey everyone, it's Minty. I've been using Ohuhus for almost 2 years now, but when I first got them, I had no idea how to use them and it took me a while to get the hang of it. You might be struggling with them too, and that's okay because this is what I drew the first time that I used them, and as you can see, it's really not the best. So I want to tell you the mistakes that I made and what I learnt so that you can use them with more confidence a lot faster than I did. But first, let's do a quick unboxing because this new set of Ohuhus just arrived. It's the 168 set, so yeah, it's a lot and it was a lot of money for me, but I think it's worth it considering how much I use them. Just like every Ohuhu set and most other marker brands, it comes with a protective sheet, some swatch cards, and also a little booklet about the markers. Okay, now moving on to the actual tips about how to use alcohol markers. My first one being about paper. If you don't have the right paper, that's really going to limit the quality of your drawings. I'll put the names of a couple different sketchbooks on screen that I would recommend for these markers. I also have reviews on my channel for most of these. When I started out, I was using a really cheap sketchbook that had super thin paper and it worked, but the markers were a lot harder to control. As soon as you get your markers, you're gonna want to swatch them all out because the ink colors might be slightly different to the caps and you're going to want to know about that. So some of these sets will come with swatch cards like Ohuhu, but some of them don't, so just do it in your sketchbook. Another tip for if your markers are brand new, I would say do not open them above any of your art or spaces that you want to keep clean, because when I got mine and took off the caps, I did get some splashes of ink on my table, so just open them above a tissue or something if they're really new. I had so many colors to swatch out, and honestly this took about 15 minutes at least to finish, but it was worth the effort. Unfortunately, this set came with a marker that was completely dry, but luckily it was just a grey, so I'm not too mad about it, but it is a little annoying. I couldn't even fill in the little swatch space for it, so I just drew a sad face with a pencil. I will be doing a full drawing in this video, but first let's go through the basics. This is a brush tip. These are the best to use for blending because of how flexible they are, but if you have brush markers, don't press down too hard on the nib or it will get damaged. You'll get out the same amount of ink if you're pressing lightly anyway, so just be careful with that. I can definitely say that brush tips are my favorite types, but they are slightly more expensive, so just consider that. Next we have the chisel tip or broad tip, whatever you like to call it. These are mostly for covering large areas really quickly, but if you have a chisel tip and the marker's not double-sided, you can still rotate it to use the thinner side for smaller details. Lastly, we have the fine tip. I don't have any fine tip Ohuhus, but they do sell them, so I used my sister's Touch New fine tip, and these aren't flexible like brush tips, and they're similar to the tips on most other pens like Colorless super tips. It's definitely harder to blend with, but as you can see, all three types get a similar result. You just might have to put a little bit more effort in. Brush nibs can get frayed after a lot of use, but Ohuhu says that you can take out the nib and reverse it to make it like new again. I've just never tried it, but I'm sure you can do that. I think that this next tip is probably my most important tip from the whole video, and it's about this Colorless Blender. It's the clear looking marker that has a 0 on it in the Ohuhu set. I don't know about others, but it's supposed to help you blend. And what I did when I first got my markers was getting two colors and just putting them next to each other and trying to blend using the Colorless Blender over the top in the middle to blend them together. I had no idea that this is not how it works at all, and what this is going to do is lighten your color and kind of suck out the ink from the page and give it this really weird texture, and it's not going to look blended at all. So the real way to use it is to put it under where you're going to blend. So you put it down on the paper before you use it, and you put the two colors, or three, whatever, that you want to blend, and they're just going to blend naturally. That's how you're supposed to use it. Please don't make the mistake of doing it on the top, because that really messed up so much of my art when I started. However, even knowing this now, I never actually used the Colorless Blender for this because you just don't need it. You can blend perfectly fine without it, but if you are struggling to blend without it, then I think it would be a good idea to use it at first. I'll show you my technique to blending without the Colorless Blender a little later on. My next tip is another thing that I suggest you do not do. I don't know if it's just me, but I assume that this is something that happens to everyone, and it's layering light colors over the top of dark colors. This seems to have the same effect as the Colorless Blender when you use it wrong, because the light color makes this weird texture on top of the darker one, and it doesn't really help your art. Unless you do want that texture, I really wouldn't recommend doing this. You can layer dark over light, but light over dark just really doesn't work out, as you can probably tell. It kind of sucks out the ink, just like the Colorless Blender. Now you might be thinking, oh, I'd never make that mistake. Why would I layer light over dark anyway? And that's what I thought too, but it happened when I used light grays to add shadow. I thought it would just add this gray on top and make it look like it's in shadow, but it doesn't, because it's lighter and it's going to give you that weird texture again. What I'm showing here is another use for the Colorless Blender, and this is something that I do use it for because it's actually very, very helpful. So as you can see, I'm just coloring colouring in this square and oops, I've gone out of the lines. What am I going to do? Well, I'm just going to get my Colorless Blender and go over it, and it's going to suck out the ink again and kind of spread it out and fade it all. And then it's basically like a rubber for alcohol markers. So I suggest doing that if it goes out of the lines. It's not going to completely get rid of the mistake that you've made, but it definitely fades it out and makes it less obvious. I actually ended up needing to use that tip in this drawing that I'm doing right now. When I move on to the teeth later, you'll see that I make a mistake that I have to use the Colorless Blender for. So yeah, these Colorless Blenders aren't completely useless, and I think it would be better if they were actually labeled erasers or something, because that's what they can be used as. Now some more blending stuff. I'm getting a purple and a yellow, and I'm going to try blend them. I promise I tried my best to blend them, and I just couldn't blend them. These two colors are so different. They're pretty much opposite. They are not going to blend smoothly. Maybe you can if you really try and work at it for ages, but it's probably not going to work. So I would suggest just adding in a couple more colors in between as transition colors to help that change. It's a lot easier to blend colors that are similar. Blending complementary colors like that is going to be pretty rare in your art anyway, unless you have some ombre hair maybe. That might need this, but you can cross that bridge when you come to it, because this is how you blend colors that are similar, which is something you're going to be doing most of the time. I've got a dark green and a light green. This is the most common kind of blending you're going to do, dark to light, especially when you're shading. And what I've done is added in two transition colors, which are medium green and another lighter medium green, and I'm just adding them in between, and then at each color change I'm just going over the dark one with the lighter one slightly, so that it doesn't add the weird texture, because I'm not doing it too much, just a little bit to help that transition. And really the secret to blending is just going over the same spot a lot of times. It's really that simple. That's a pretty smooth transition, am I right? This is me right now using the Colorless Blender to get rid of a mistake I made on the teeth. I did a line way too dark, and it basically made a grey line in the teeth, so I went over that with the Colorless Blender, and if you look at the teeth right now in this drawing, I just used a pencil to redo that line again. But yeah, the Colorless Blender is helpful. You should probably test out your line art pens before doing a full drawing, so just do a line with your line art pen on the paper and then go over it with the marker. I would probably say yellow is the best one to use, because any blending, bleeding, whatever, is going to show up a lot more with yellow. I put a cross by the line with the pink because it did pick up the pen and it started getting all orangey with the yellow marker, but I actually use that pink pen all the time, even though it does bleed, and you might be wondering why, but it's simply just a stylistic choice, if that's the word. I kind of like how it picks up the pen because it adds a pink tone to my art, but you're probably not going to want that with a black pen that you use thick line art for, because you're going to get this black smudging all over your art. So definitely swatch those first, because they can really mess up a piece and you probably don't want that. And yeah, those are all the really basic tips that would have helped me a lot when I first started out, but I didn't know them and I messed up a lot of my art pieces. So hopefully now you're not going to do that. It might still take some time to get used to these markers, but hopefully if you follow my tips and everything, then you will be able to get the hang of it. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, then maybe hit the like and subscribe. I know I never really ask that, but if you're new, then that would be pretty cool. Thanks for watching. Bye!